Though they did have a proper understanding of what liberty meant in the natural sense, I don't think that in the sense politically that there's really any way for that to be compatible with Christianity. It's so broad, it's so easily abstracted and so easily abused by people that intend to do evil to this country, to fundamentally change this country, that it simply should not have been used. I mean, they should have used something like liberty from sin or liberty from evil and had a state church clearly define what is and isn't evil. That way we would understand it as a people. We would direct ourselves in a certain direction. When we only have liberty in there, well, we can direct ourselves in any direction that we like. As a result, we are where we are today, with a fundamental misunderstanding of liberty guiding the policymakers of our country. And it derives specifically from that word that we chose to use in the Declaration of Independence. What is up, guys? Welcome back to Red Top Report Premium. I just want to thank you guys all for supporting us and signing up as a premium subscriber. Don't forget to tell your friends, because we can't keep doing this content without your guys' help. Now, this is going to be part 3 in our Unalienable Rights of the Declaration of Independence series. We're going to break down everything in this specific first line of the Declaration of Independence. It says, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we've already discussed the first line that talks about how all men are created equal, and we've also talked about the specific passages on life. And we're basically trying to figure out how these rights stack up to what Christianity itself teaches, and whether or not this truly is a Christian nation, whether or not the founders made mistakes when doing this document, and whether the direction of our country today, which is incredibly anti-Christian, is a symptom of exactly how the country was structured from the very beginning. Now, this is what the founders had to say about liberty, which is the third. As I said before, everyone has an unalienable right to liberty. So that means that God gave everyone liberty. It comes from God. So is this true? Well, this is what the founding fathers say liberty is, because a lot of people think liberty is something that the founders did not think liberty is. Now, they believed that liberty is to do what you want so long as you remain obedient to the laws of nature and of nature's God. So this goes entirely against what we traditionally think of as Americans when we talk about what liberty is. I mean, according to our own upbringing, I mean, and Ronan, I think we both grew up in America. What do you think liberty means?
Liberty means you can do whatever you want.
Yes. In what capacity is there this obedience to, some sort of law? And is there even a nature's God in liberty? From the perspective of, modern Americans, liberty would mean the freedom to just not believe in God at all and to act as if God doesn't exist and adhere to a morality as if God doesn't exist. I mean, don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's completely inverted what we think of when we think of liberty. And what they're actually talking about is licentiousness when that comes on. And the founders, to their defense, did not believe in that at all. The type of liberty that they were talking about was an ordered liberty. And this is an idea that came from Edmund Burke, who I believe was either an 18th or 17th century scholar. I can't remember which. But he talked about what it meant. And there is a sense of order. There is a sense of obedience, and it obviously includes God in it as well. So a lot of these people who are saying, oh, these, the founders were, deists and atheists and stuff like that. First off, I don't think any of them were atheists. Some of them were deists, but most of them were Christians. Most of the founders were Christians. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about the founders, and a lot of it derives from this false understanding of liberty that these people actually had. Their sense of liberty actually came from this thing called natural law. You want to throw that one up? And this is what they mean by natural law. Natural law is a system of right or justice held to be common to all humans and derived from nature. Now, what they're talking about specifically in these instances are what you're free to do in nature, your essential free will, and how to use your free will in a common and natural way. For example, killing another human being is not a natural act. The human being is not naturally ordered towards taking away the humanity of another person. In fact, we're oriented towards reviling that in many cases, unless we have to in a case of self-defense, which is where we're in a very unnatural position. And then we can also look at it from a sexual perspective as well when we look at natural law. What is the purpose of sex according to natural law? Well, according to that, it would be a procreative and unitive act between man and woman for the purposes. Once again, it's procreative. The purpose of the sex, the reason the sex exists, why it was created by God, the whole purpose of that is to create other human beings. That's why we're naturally ordered to want sex. We're naturally ordered to desire sex, but we're so natural. And that's why we talk about homosexuality. We talk about contraception. Those things are all unnatural. Those are adding unnatural aspects to the human condition to try and take away a intrinsic part of the act itself away from it, its natural purpose. It's unnatural. It's wrong. And that's why states in the United States were allowed to legislate against this sort of thing. You have these things called the Comstock laws. And these Comstock laws were essentially laws against contraception. Like you couldn't contracept was one of them. You couldn't engage in homosexual acts. It was illegal at the time. You could not get divorced if, I think it was, unless the reasoning was adultery or I don't even think it was abuse in many cases. You know, there was this extreme respect for natural law in this country. And what happens is about a century after the Civil War, all of that started to decline. All of this, we started to get this perverted, strange, weird idea of what liberty actually meant to the founders. Now, what they're talking about is actually a very Christian version of liberty. So let's actually put up a quote from Pope Leo XIII. He says that everything, without exception, must be subject to him and must serve him, so that whosoever holds the right to govern holds it from one sole and single source, namely God, the sovereign ruler of all. There is no power but from God. And let's go a little bit deeper into this, because I want to explain what Pope Leo is basically saying here is that human beings do have power as individuals in the state of nature. Were there no government, were there nothing in societally formed, the form of government would be the family, of which the man is the head, the wife is the helpmate, and the kids are under both of them. And obviously, on the supernatural level, Christ is the head of the entire thing. But the founders didn't get into the natural. They didn't get into the supernatural. They only focused on the natural. That the point is when you have power, that power starts with those individuals, and those individuals come together and form a family, and then they can form a bigger and bigger and bigger institution by collectively using their power together to choose what source of government that they choose to have. Now, obviously, you have Plato talking about the different forms of government. He had a polity, which is a form of republic. He had a aristocracy, which is a form of a few people run the government, and he had a monarchy where you have one person running the government. Now, obviously, he had inverse forms of these that were evil, and the inverse forms of those governments were democracy, which many would argue America is living in right now, where people vote themselves licentiousness, using their power for licentiousness and not true liberty. And then you also have an oligarchy, which is something that other people argue we have, like how these globalists are operating as an oligarchy to basically control the world's governments and undermine what the people actually desire. Probably a mix of both when you look at America, to be perfectly honest with you. And then obviously you have a tyranny when you have a monarch. But I don't think anybody believes we're living in a tyranny right now, unless it's Satan's tyranny. I definitely agree we're living in that right now. But as the negative form of that form of government. So when we put all of that together, what Leo's getting at here is saying that there is no power but from God. So whatever government you choose, that power that you gave to those people, that power comes from God, and that collective power over you comes from God. So you are to obey the laws in all but sin in civil society. That's what you're duty bound to do. And in that way, that actually goes against the traditional understanding of liberty for Americans, because Americans think, well, I don't like this law, or I don't like this thing, or I don't like whatever, whatever thing, so I don't have to obey it. Not because it's immoral, but because you personally don't like it. Well, you ceded your power to that government. So, in a way, you are, in some respects, responsible for being obedient to those laws, which goes back to what the founders are saying. You're being obedient to nature's laws, you're being obedient to God's laws. Now, that's what our government decided would be the type of liberty that we use, which means that there is no supernatural aspect to the federal government of the United States of America. Our principles as a nation are to uphold the natural law, but not to focus so much on the supernatural laws. So Pope Leo continues to talk about man's natural freedom in another encyclical that he wrote. This one's called Libertas, and specifically on the liberty of man, where he kind of vouches a little bit for the founders' idea, but not quite where you think he would. He says, as the Catholic Church declares in the strongest terms the simplicity, spirituality, and immortality of the soul, so with unequaled constancy and publicity, she ever also asserts its freedom. Now, it's important to note here that what he's making is a deeply theological point and is not necessarily the same thing as a political point. But what the founders did was they decided to merge the theological point with the political point. Now, what he's saying is that man naturally does have freedom, and that includes the freedom to choose hell, the freedom to do evil, the freedom to be a slave to sin. You actually have that. That is our natural freedom within us, in our fallen state. God ultimately gives us true freedom because he wants to give us the freedom to love him. And that's the theological point that Leo's trying to get across here. He's not saying that men are destined to be allowed, by governments to do whatever they want. And that's not what the founders were saying either. So he kind of validates what the founders are saying a little bit here. But he goes on to continue. These truths she has always taught in reference to the Catholic Church, and has sustained them as a dogma of faith. And whensoever heretics or innovators have attacked the liberty of man, the church has defended it and protected this noble possession from destruction. Now, what he means by the liberty of man is, once again, you're looking at a natural state. Like, men do have a natural right to property, for example. That's a great example. This is actually something that John Locke, an Enlightenment philosopher, talked about in depth. And he basically says that, men have a natural right to their own property. Somebody taking away something that belongs to you as a person is unnatural. It is immoral. And in the state of nature, the land that you claimed would be your land. And that's correct. You would have possession over it. You're oriented towards having your own property, having your own space, and having your own household on top of that. So, a lot of other things as far as property is concerned works that way. Now, what I think is so interesting about this is that, once again, we go back to the difference between political and theological. Though theologically, it is true that the liberty of man to choose hell, to choose sin, to do all of those things, that's not exactly what Leo is talking about here. Theologically and even politically, he's referring to the liberty of man here. He's trying to basically, how do I break it down in more layman's terms? He's trying to say that the liberty of man is their freedom to reject sin, to reject the evil, to reject the sinful lifestyle. And this goes back to, adhering to the natural law, but not merely the natural law, but also the supernatural law, also the supernatural truths of the faith. We look at things so temporally, and what we see in the Constitution that I think is a very, very dangerous error is that we put in this term liberty, and liberty is obviously correct, like we said, and obviously their understanding of it was largely correct in terms of the temporal world and the natural world, of which a political governing system is supposed to, have control over and authority over. But it doesn't go far enough. And in many ways, it merges It merges the theological truth and leaves it open to a theological abstraction over time, as opposed to it being merely a political truth about, nature and things like that. So, I mean, let's go into some of the problems that we have here. What can basically happen is you can have an influx. You don't want your people to change. That's a good way to put it. If your people are a morally upright, obedient Christian populace, yet in your culture you allow the evangelization, you allow all these different ideas to form on what's the true form of Christianity, you allow people to have things in an ununified structure like the United States did at the time. You get diversity of theology, and to be honest with you, not all truth is natural. They talk about liberty as obeying the natural law, and that's something that many Jews, Muslims, and Christians would all agree on if they applied their religious ethics to pretty much prescribe any problem in society right now. There's natural laws is very self-evident, I would say, to humanity. But not all truth is natural. And in that sense, you either need to have a strong church that represents the values of that nation, or you have to actually have a government that upholds these natural law positions and the supernatural law positions authoritatively to prevent diversity of theology. Now, that many different religions, this is what I was saying, many different religions adhere to natural law. Only one of these faiths can be true, as all of them contradict each other on supernatural truths. So therefore, a government focuses on protecting the supernatural truths it can in accordance with the church as well as the natural truth. So this would be something like blasphemy laws. I mean, do we really want to live in a society, Christians, where it's perfectly okay to display Satan outside of your house to people, to expose people to the diabolical, to let in awful, heinous acts like abortion, which is a form, of, whether people do it knowingly or not, child sacrifice to the devil? To allow these sorts of things to come into your country under the guise of liberty, under the guise of diversity of theology, I mean, you put yourself in a very dangerous position as a Christian. You should not advocate for those things. You should advocate that your supernatural truths are protected. So just to give a good example of, natural virtue, you have natural virtues like prudence, temperance, fortitude, things like that. And those can exist in Muslim societies. Those can exist in Christian societies, in Jewish societies, all, any country that respects natural law, you'll have the cultivation of those virtues enshrined into law insofar as they choose to enshrine them into law. But when it comes to supernatural truths, well, we started as a country with, how many Christian denominations? It's just like we have all these different Christian denominations in the country, and we don't know which of those is true. And we have no state church or state religion national religion to tell us what our country's identity is. Though we allow people the freedom to practice whichever religion they choose, our nation itself's principles are kind of muddied, and we have this like loose Christian understanding of morality that we all use, but there's disagreements in those. I mean, there's some Protestants that agree with contraception. There's some, and then Catholics disagree with contraception entirely. There's some Protestants that also disagree with contraception. There's now churches that are declaring that it's Christian to be gay married, which is just entirely incorrect. We have all of these different ideas coming through. We have this incredible diversity of theology, and all it does is confuse people. And our government cannot take an authoritative stance against any of these things because in their mind, you can't protect supernatural truths, but you can only protect natural truths. That is a massive, massive hole in our society. Even if they did hold to the founders' definition of liberty, which largely is in accordance with Christianity, but it's incomplete. It's incomplete because it offers the country no spiritual guidance or direction, theologically. And it leaves the question open, which creates unhealthy debates, and sinful people will come to sinful conclusions and spread sinful ideas, which ultimately is something that will be the downfall of our country. And you're seeing it today. We don't even respect the natural law anymore because we allowed ourselves to be confused with with a machine gun of bad arguments coming from the other side that say, well, since you guys can't agree on this, it could be this, it could be that. And then you have really bad ideas that get popularity like Marxism. You get really bad ideas that get popularity like transgenderism and gender theory, gender ideology, all sorts of nonsense, abortion ideology, population control ideology. All of that comes from a disordered understanding of liberty because we basically just left it all up to natural law, and we left it all up to the word liberty, which once again, much like equality, was far, far, far too broadly used in the Declaration of Independence. I don't know, Ronan, what do you think? You think we can add anything else to this just to put a bow on it?
I think when I was young, I learned the definition of freedom, the choice to do what's right, and that no one really knows that today at all.
Yeah, and a lot of the founding fathers, like John Adams specifically, said that America wouldn't survive if it wasn't a religious people, and you're seeing that today, because the religious people were the ones that would uphold the supernatural truths that the government did not protect. America at this juncture is so diverse in its theologies that there's really no way for the people to unify behind a single idea. The single idea can't be the Constitution, because the single idea is that we can all get along, but we can't all get along because only one thing can be true. And we as human beings are, at least moral human beings, are oriented towards finding truth, So at the end of the day, this is how anybody should break it down. Though they did have a proper understanding of what liberty meant in the natural sense, I don't think that in the sense politically that liberty was used, that there's really any way for that to be compatible with Christianity. It's so broad. It's so easily like abstracted and so easily abused by people that intend to do evil to this country, to fundamentally change this country, that it simply should not have been used as a word. The true word liberty. I mean, they should have used something like liberty from sin or liberty from evil and things like that, and had a state church clearly define what is and isn't evil. That way we would understand it as a people. We would direct ourselves in a certain direction. When we only have liberty in there, well, we can direct ourselves in any direction that we like, because anybody can go out there and say, well, what they meant by liberty was licentiousness. Whether it's correct or not, whether that's what the founders meant or not, when you just have the term there, it's really easy for anybody to come to that conclusion. And they did come to that conclusion. And as a result, we are where we are today, with a fundamental misunderstanding of liberty guiding the policymakers of our country. And it derives specifically from that word that we chose to use in the Declaration of Independence. And on that note, guys, we're going to wrap up this installment of the Unalienable Rights Series. I really look forward to you guys joining us again for our last concluding episode. And we're going to talk about the pursuit to happiness. We'll see you next time. All you red top recruits and giga chatters, God bless you.